Alright, let's dive into this story because it's a perfect example of how a single event can ripple through people's lives in ways that are both frustrating and deeply personal. So, here's the deal. Matt and Sarah Krakowski, a couple from Calgary, planned a trip to San Francisco to celebrate their 10-year anniversary, their first getaway without their 3 young daughters. Sounds like a much-needed break, right? But then, the WestJet strike happened, and what was supposed to be a smooth return home turned into a chaotic nightmare. Personally, I think this story highlights something bigger: the tension between corporate labor disputes and the very human consequences they create. What makes this really interesting is how the Krakowskis' situation wasn't just about delayed flights or inconvenience. They missed their youngest daughter's 2nd birthday. That's a milestone you can't get back, no matter how many travel credits you receive. Matt said it perfectly: that's something no travel credit or reimbursement can replace. And that's the thing, when we talk about strikes or corporate negotiations, we often forget the personal stories behind the headlines. From my perspective, this is a stark reminder that these disruptions aren't just about numbers or contracts, they're about real people's lives. Now, let's talk about the strike itself. WestJet flight attendants, represented by CUPE, were fighting for fair pay, specifically, to be paid from the time they check in until they clock out, not just when the plane is in motion. I get it, it's a legitimate demand. But here's where it gets complicated. The strike led to the cancellation of hundreds of flights, leaving passengers stranded during peak travel season. Between August 1st and August 6th, WestJet cancelled 929 flights. That's about a third of their schedule. On August 2nd alone, every single one of their 494 flights was grounded. If you take a step back and think about it, that's a massive disruption for thousands of people, not just the Krakowskis. One thing that immediately stands out is how the airline handled the rebooking process. The Krakowskis were initially rerouted through Anaheim, California, only to be sent back to San Francisco 2 days later before finally heading home. Matt called it a little crazy, and honestly, I'd call it worse than that. It feels like the system failed them, not just the strike, but the lack of communication and the absurdity of the rebooking. What many people don't realize is that airlines often prioritize operational logistics over passenger convenience during disruptions, and that's where the frustration really builds. Here's where it gets even more frustrating. Under Canada's air passenger protection regulations, airlines aren't required to compensate domestic passengers for expenses like hotels or meals during labor disputes. Why? Because strikes are considered outside the airline's control. Personally, I think that's a flawed system. If an airline's internal issues cause passengers to incur extra costs, shouldn't there be some accountability? The Krakowskis spent an extra $1,000 on accommodations and missed 2 days of work, all while WestJet remained silent. That's a detail I find fascinating: how companies can legally avoid responsibility for the chaos they indirectly cause. But let's zoom out for a second. This story isn't just about one couple's bad luck, it's about the broader tension between workers' rights and customer experience. Matt said he supports the flight attendants' cause, but he's frustrated by how it impacted him and his family. That's a sentiment I've heard a lot. People understand the need for strikes but feel caught in the crossfire. What this really suggests is that there's a systemic issue here. How do we balance fair labor practices with minimizing harm to the public? It's a question that doesn't have an easy answer. Finally, let's talk about the emotional toll. The Krakowskis' reunion with their daughters was described as pure joy, but it came after days of stress and exhaustion. They're planning a make-up party for their daughter's birthday, which is sweet, but it doesn't erase the fact they missed the actual day. This raises a deeper question: how do we quantify the emotional cost of these disruptions? It's not something you can put a price tag on, and that's what makes it so heartbreaking. So, here's my closing thought: strikes are necessary for progress, but they also expose the cracks in our systems. The Krakowskis' story is a reminder that behind every cancelled flight or delayed itinerary, there's a human story. It's easy to get caught up in the logistics or the politics, but at the end of the day, these disruptions affect real people in real ways. What do you think? How do we strike a balance between supporting workers' rights and protecting passengers? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your perspective.